Good evening, I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. Our top stories for tonight. Tariffs, tariffs and tariffs. We examine the rate of tariffs outlined in Trump's letter to the countries. And how can ASEAN be more resilient when it comes to global trade? We explore all this on AWANI International. The United States is turning up the heat again. In a fresh wave of tariff hikes, Washington is now targeting a swath of emerging markets, many of them in Asia, with new duties on strategic imports. However, this time it's not just about China. For Malaysia, as you can see, there's an increase from 24% on Liberation Day and now 25%. Well, it looks small on paper, but meaningful when laid against our already delicate export environment. Now, the newly announced tariffs come on the back of earlier threats, and while some duties have been dialed back slightly, others still remain steep. If you look right here, among the hardest hit here in ASEAN are, of course, Laos and Myanmar, each slapped with a 40% tariff, although that's down from the more punishing one, 48% for Laos, 44% for Myanmar, respectively. Cambodia, once seen as a key alternative to China for textile and apparel manufacturing, now faces a 36% tariff, a reduction from the earlier proposed 49% tariff. Less, but still significant. Others like Thailand, seeing no change in their 36% rate. And of course, we can move closer to other parts of Asia, where Japan and South Korea also now faces 25% tariff. A marginal uptick from previous threats, of course, similar to us in terms of the rate, while Bangladesh and Serbia will face slightly lower rates than initially threatened, though still in the mid-30% range. South Africa and Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Indonesia, are in the 30 to 32% range, reflecting Washington's broader intent to clamp down on what it views as trade diversion and non-market advantages, especially in sectors like electronics, textiles and metals. So what does all this mean for Malaysia as well as the region? We will be exploring these questions in the coming days. While Malaysia's direct share of US imports remains modest, around less than 2%, we are part of a tightly woven Asian supply chain. When tariffs hit Thailand, Vietnam or Indonesia, the ripple often reaches our ports too. So while the tariff numbers may vary, rising in some cases, falling in others, the real message from Washington is this: the US is watching, and the room for quiet substitution in global trade is shrinking. And for Malaysia, walking the fine line between trade, diversification, and economic resilience just got a little tad more complicated. Now, moving on, there's still time to negotiate with the US over the 25% tariff set to take effect on August 1st, says Investment, Trade and Industry Minister Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul Abdul Aziz. He says for now, the ministry has issued an official statement and will hold a press conference after Wednesday's cabinet meeting. In the statement, the ministry said Putrajaya will take all necessary steps to reduce the tariff's impact, which is higher than the original 24%. It added that talks with US officials will continue in good faith to resolve key issues, clarify the tariff scope, and fast-track ongoing negotiations. The ministry also highlighted Malaysia's strong trade ties with the US, with a total trade surge nearly 30% in 2024, reaching $71.4 billion. In the letter to Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, US President Donald Trump called the 25% tariff far less than needed to fix the US trade deficit with Malaysia. Trump also sent similar letters to leaders of 14 countries, announcing tariffs of 25 to 40%, a move seen as pressure to speed up trade talks. Of course, we have more on the countries' reactions to their own respective tariffs. Stay tuned.
Berita hebat untuk pelanggan Astro Movies dan Epic Cut. Prime Video kini termasuk dalam langganan anda.
Who's the action hero now?
Anda boleh stream 24 jam sehari. Pelbagai filem kesukaan anda.
Amazing.
Amazon Originals.
It's big. Are you ready?
Serta K-Favorites terkini. Semua ni dan banyak lagi.
Kalian pilih video siapa yang akan tayang.
Pelanggan Astro Movies dan Epic Pack. Stream Prime Video sekarang dengan Astro. Anda juga boleh langgan Prime Video melalui aplikasi My Astro.
South Korea plans to step up trade talks with Washington, viewing US President Donald Trump's proposed 25% tariff from August 1st as effectively allowing a grace period before duties are imposed. This follows Trump's letter to Seoul and 14 other trading partners of the higher tariffs set today.
South Korea's industry ministry said it will work to improve domestic systems and regulations to address the trade deficit, a key U.S. concern. According to Korea Customs Service data, South Korea recorded a $55.6 billion trade surplus with the U.S. in 2024, up 25% from 2023, driven by rising car exports. In Trump's letter to South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung, he said the relationship had been far from reciprocal, inviting South Korea to propose measures to open its markets and remove tariff and non-tariff barriers. He added that while the 25% tariff would apply to all South Korean products, exemptions would be granted for goods manufactured in the U.S.
China warns the Trump administration today not to reignite trade tensions by reimposing tariffs on Chinese goods next month. It also threatens to retaliate against countries that align with the US to exclude China from the global supply chains.
In June, Washington and Beijing reached a tentative trade framework, easing tensions, but with many details still unclear, keeping traders and investors on both sides of the Pacific guessing. China, which faced tariffs exceeding 100%, has until August 12 to negotiate with the White House to avoid renewed import restrictions imposed from earlier tariff exchanges. The official People's Daily has stated in a commentary that dialogue and cooperation are the only correct path, referring to the ongoing China-US trade tensions. According to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, the average U.S. tariff on Chinese exports now stands at 51.1%, while China's average tariff on U.S. goods is 32.6%, covering nearly all bilateral trade.
Japan's top trade negotiator, Ryosei Akazawa, says the country's trade deal with the U.S. must include tariff concessions for its vital automobile industry. His comments follows U.S. President Donald Trump's announcement of 25% tariffs on Japanese goods starting August 1st.
Akazawa said after a 40-minute phone call with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, both sides agreed to keep negotiating. He added that they aim to agree on measures covering trade, non-tariff barriers, and economic security cooperation. Akazawa noted Japan has no deadline for a deal and will not compromise its agriculture sector for an early agreement. He stressed that protecting the automobile industry, now facing steep tariffs, is a top priority.
U.S. President Donald Trump has met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House as indirect talks between Israel and Hamas continue over U.S.-brokered Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal. Trump has high hopes the ceasefire deal to go through, adding that negotiations were going along very well.
Beyond the truce, Trump also raised his earlier controversial plan to relocate Palestinians from Gaza and redevelop the enclave into a luxury waterfront, a proposal Netanyahu supports. Netanyahu said Israel is working closely with the U.S. to find countries willing to accept displaced Palestinians, and talks with several nations are getting close. He also told Trump he had nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize, using the visit to reaffirm their close ties as the U.S. pushes for a ceasefire. This was Trump's third in-person meeting with Netanyahu since returning to office in January, and came just 2 weeks after he ordered strikes on Iranian nuclear sites in support of Israeli air raids.
With global power dynamics shifting and the U.S. commitment to multilateralism in question, what should a resilient ASEAN look like? Professor Danny Kwah from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore says it's time for the region to rebuild a rules-based order with or without America.
If the system is being disrupted because the United States feels that it needs to withdraw from the multilateral rules-based order, the rest of the world, including ASEAN, will have to try and recreate that. I think there's a way to think about it in terms of something called pathfinder multilateralism. So what ASEAN, Malaysia needs to do is to think about how we can recreate a rules-based order for which there is a level playing field that allows international trade to occur, for which there is a commitment to peaceful dispute resolution. It is possible to do that even without the United States. That's the kind of model that I think Malaysia and ASEAN needs to go towards. We need to be forensic in our thinking on this. When we say that America has disrupted the system, what we might be thinking is that it's trying to undermine the system for everyone else, or it's simply withdrawing. My view is the second is correct. It is simply withdrawing. We must not be confused into thinking that it's trying to disturb the rest of us. We need to proceed as if it's not here. And there's actually evidence that it's quite happy with that. When America withdrew from TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that system was left in tatters, but Japan and other nation states continued with it and built something called CPTPP. And America said absolutely nothing about it. So we should feel confident that we can rebuild a rules-based multilateral order without the United States in our region.
As geopolitical tensions grow, diversifying supply chains may bring long-term benefits, but only if it is done for the right reasons.
The fact that all the rest of us have been shocked into thinking about a China plus one strategy could be a good thing. We have become too complacent. We have to remember that the entire supply chain, the system of international trade, is meant to bring about good things for us. The things that we need now most are control over runaway cost of living. We cannot get by. People will be thrown back into poverty if the cost of living rises too high. A second reason we should be thinking about rewiring the supply chain or China plus one strategy is if by doing that, we have access to better technology. The old way of doing things was a way that burned hydrocarbons, and that was frying our planet to a crisp through environmental change. If the America shock to the system makes us think about a China plus one strategy that helps us reduce cost of living and helps us improve our technology, then we should welcome it. And there's actually good reason to think that we should be doing this. The bottom 50% of China's population has seen its incomes increase 600% in the last 2 decades. Costs of operating in China are rising. We should be thinking about diversifying to other parts of the world where cost of living, wages are still under control. Having said that, there's actually also a bad reason for trying to go to China plus one. And that is if we think that by doing China plus one, we can console and appease the United States in its geopolitical conflict with China. I think that's a bad reason for doing China plus one. We are simply doing chain washing. We're trying to take products from China that America does not want to be sold in the world, and we're rebranding it. That's a terrible way to do business. And if we try and do chain washing through China plus one, not only is it a bad thing, it makes things more expensive, it's bound to fail. America will find this out quickly enough. But the more important point here is that if America has a problem with trade with China, that problem with trade is not China's alone. America is aggrieved at the entire international trading system. Liberation Day tariffs were not directed at just China. They were directed at everyone, including America's friends, Canada, Mexico. the United Kingdom, Singapore, Malaysia. So America has challenges dealing with international trade, and we should not be thinking about a China plus one strategy as simply a cheap way to do chain washing that helps appease the United States.
That report wraps up AWANI International tonight. Stay tuned for our reports on the rivalries, strategies, and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more. Be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. Thank you for watching. Good night.